With that, I'm your chair. With my panel, I have.
Akshat, all the best for the debate.
Keisha, all the best.
Hello, Sahasra, all the best. Just very quickly, going over the house rules. Kindly be extremely respectful in terms of the language that you're using. Attack the arguments, not the debaters. And yeah, with that, PM, whenever you're ready, you're here.
Starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, just on frame. First, we need to define murder, right? Because opposition will go ahead and tell you that actively having malice towards someone and then, let's say, stabbing them with a knife is murder. But what's most important on opening government is to tell you what's also murder. That is to say, the concept of depraved hard murder, which is identified by all jurisdictions like the US and India, which means that when you relentlessly engage in conduct that creates a presumption that there may be likely death as a cause of that action and that ultimately leads to death, the fact that you have caused that death is presumed, which means intent to kill is not something opposition can come and question us. But more importantly, how this is more definitely concretized. Two things that you have to prove for murder: mens rea as well as actus reus. Actus reus, at the moment that she knows that she is a carrier for typhoid and she actively chooses to engage by being as a cook into individuals who may be affected by it, is sufficient actus reus. As far as mens rea is concerned, even if opposition goes ahead and says that she is not the one who wanted them to die, just the fact that she does kill them, being aware of the fact that she is likely to die, means that there is enough mens rea to constitute intent to kill. Yes.
Yeah, so if someone drives over the speed limit, there's a possibility that you might end up killing someone. So anyone driving over 60 should be put behind bars for murder?
No, but once you have killed someone while you were drunk and you were driving, then you can be put behind bars for murder. But most importantly, don't let opposition come ahead and talk to you about how Mary wasn't aware of it, right? We are not talking about the first range of outbreaks here. We are talking about the fact that she was already diagnosed by doctors, already quarantined because of the same reason, and still went ahead and continued with such acts. And therefore, we think it is the second outbreak that necessarily goes ahead and constitutes murder. Moving on to our major arguments. First, just the legal threshold. Opposition can't go ahead and contest that they did not want to kill specific people and that is why it is not murder. Just because you go ahead and fire a gun into a crowd of people, everyone you kill, you are liable for the murder of. We don't think there has to be specific malice towards someone for you to be constituted under murder. But more importantly, there are three other things that go ahead and give us that information, right? Firstly, she was already educated about typhoid. The fact that she was quarantined, psychologically tested, and the fact that doctors conclusively told you that you were an asymptomatic carrier means that there is no ambiguity with the fact that she was not aware of what her actions could cause. Second argument, just on the idea that law placed a binding condition on you to not go ahead and cook, which means that even if you don't believe that you were an asymptomatic carrier or the fact you think that you have been discriminated against because you are an immigrant, even then, just by law, when you've been prevented to do something, you have the responsibility to carry that out as a person who's living within that society, right? Therefore, we think that it is a reasonable expectation for you to put on Mary that if you've been prohibited from cooking, you will now have to go ahead and access an alternate profession. How the alternate profession is going to come by is not something that is the state's prerogative to necessarily go ahead and prove. But even then, we go ahead and give you the analysis that state always has employee reformation programs for example, for the families of martyrs or people who have been disabled within the military. We don't think that existing only and only as a cook is the purpose of life for Mary, not taking right now. Thirdly, with regards to the disbelief argument that opposition might go ahead and bring to you, right? The science often is something that is questioned by immigrants, especially who come from regressive classes, because of the fact that certain medical terms may not be accessible to these masses. We think that is not an argument that you can make within this debate, because of the fact that you might have your religious belief, anti-scientific beliefs, but just the fact that you agree to a social contract and the fact that you exist within the society, you have to abide by the laws or the restrictions imposed upon you by the society itself, which through the context that we get, is that she cannot engage in being a cook even further. Fourth, which comes to active deception, right? And here's our larger argument that we want to make. We're not talking about Mary's existence here. We're not saying that Mary should have died after she was diagnosed with being an asymptomatic carrier. But just the idea that you were asked to do something and the fact that you choose to deceive other people. Why has she chosen to deceive other people by creating a false name for herself? Two reasons, right? First, to evade the authorities, because she already knows that the authorities have placed certain restrictions upon her, and therefore if she is caught being a cook again, she's just trying to protect herself from that. We don't think that is a fair thing to do. Just because you want to protect yourself to bypass laws is not what a citizen is inherently required to do. But secondly, she does that because she thinks there is no alternate opportunity existing. We think at a point where Mary has decided, I don't want to alternatively pursue any other career options, is an incredible harm on opposition, because she has limited herself to the career option of being a cook for everyone. The moment she does that, she is either choosing a trade-off between becoming unemployed or to killing people. And the moment they go ahead and choose the fact that it is okay for her to go and become a cook, we think it is largely a benefit that they can't claim on their side, and therefore she should be liable for murder.
If the people should always agree to the state because of social contract, then should people never dissent, and can the state just take away habeas corpus without any prerogative?
I mean, great, but if you're killing people, then you should definitely listen to the state. If the state tells you, let's just not kill people, right? I mean, that is a very common thing to understand. But more importantly, here the other idea is very simply about attributing blame. The fact that even if you say that she is not directly responsible for the deaths, because if it's because of her biological makeup, that she is a typhoid carrier, the fact that you have caused something while being knowing of the detrimental effects of the same things means that you have to be attributed blame for that. If you let Mary go scot-free today, that means that tomorrow anyone who is causing any sort of death will be able to shrug off that responsibility just because I have not actively decided to kill someone on the basis of that. We think at any point of time there has to be someone who is blamed for the deaths of multiple individuals, especially when that death is being caused by a fact that she was already aware of. Secondly, the fact that this blame cannot be digressed onto the state, because as far as the state is concerned, they've already fulfilled their responsibility by creating a binding legal obligation on you to say that you don't have to engage in the act of being a cook at any point of time. Considering that, cooks always have a special duty of care by law, right? Anything that creates sustenance for individuals, such as cooks and doctors, have a special duty of care onto the people that they are serving. At any point of time, the masters, when they get cooks to cook for them, they are not reasonably expecting and have not consented to the fact that you're going to poison my food, or even if it is implicit that I'm going to die because of food that you cook. All of these reasons inherently mean that even if they go ahead and say that it was not a direct murder, it is still an implicit murder and should be convicted.
Decisions can affect someone's life. तो वहाँ पे तुम्हारा lens का, तुम्हारा practice क्या भी हो तो तुम्हारा lens क्या
Am I audible?
Alright. You guys are available? Let's start. In 3, 2, 1. The social contract is a two-way street. The state does not just sacrifice individual people's rights for the greater good constantly. Whenever you sacrifice this individual person's right, it has to be under a situation of A, either you have provided them an alternative and they've chosen not to opt in, or B, there was an implicit alternative that was available and they have chosen not to opt in. This is what we will try to disprove throughout opening opposition case. The first thing that I want to do is to give some responses to opening government. The first thing that they say is that this is not the state's prerogative to be able to provide this woman with alternative careers and stuff like that. I would argue that it is, and the reason that it is my first frame, which is very important and crucial to understand this debate. In open semi-finals, Anga told you that women are vulnerable. This woman is very vulnerable. Why? Because she came from Ireland. What happened in Ireland and why did Irish people even emigrate to the US in the first place? This was a massive thing called the potato blight, the potato famine. What basically happened was Ireland was largely dependent on potatoes to be able to sustain themselves, but also to be able to conduct trade and stuff. And this was something that was actively taken down. By whom? By the British. The same way that they caused the Bengal famine, they also caused the Irish potato famine in an attempt to go ahead and bring Ireland into the greater fold of the British Empire. Why is this important? This is important because you need to understand, number one, this is a community that has fled from an active threat and is coming to this place seeking asylum, seeking aid, and seeking active help from these people and not further oppression. But secondly, this community and this woman specifically has reasonable reasons to distrust the state and to understand that the state can be acting against her at any point. Because she has precedent in her life where this exact same thing has happened to her and has happened to many, many members of her community. It doesn't matter whether we think like murder is valid or murder is invalid or whatever. What matters is whether this specific person had an intent to kill people and whether this was something, and I'll respond to that, and whether this is something that actually happened. The first thing I want to do then, after this claim, is to set up what she actually did. Because if the claim is that for murder you only need two things, which is mens rea and actus reus, we would claim to you that A, mens rea was obviously not there, in the sense that she did not intend to kill these specific people. Yes, they say that you have a duty of care or whatever, but you would claim, and later on in my speech, that you have a bigger duty to yourself and your own community. But secondly, in terms of actus reus, again, she had no intent to kill specific people. She has no reason to believe she is the killer of specific people. And if this state is one that is going to try to enforce this idea onto her that yes, you are a carrier and yes, you need to do this, she had no reason to trust the state when the state actually went ahead and said this. Which means that A, she had no actual victims or targets. B, even if she did, this would be something that would just be counterintuitive to herself and her career. She would not get further jobs as a cook. She would not be accepted within her community because she put a bad name on the community and all of these kinds of things. What I want to prove to you then is that, look, in this debate, it is a very high burden for government to be able to prove that she committed something that was murder. Anything that is short of murder is something that is likely to be closer to innocence, and I will prove to you that she largely acted in self-defense, and hence she should be considered innocent if we weigh both of these crimes against each other. What are the criteria that you need to buy in order to be able to buy a claim of self-defense? There are two criteria. The first is an active perception of threat, and the second is a lack of availability of alternative options in ways in which you can go ahead and deal with that threat. Why was there an active perception of threat? The first reason as to why there was an active perception of threat is that you already know that this US state, but also the state that the US is allied with, the UK, has incentives against your community. So the UK obviously acted against your community, but even when the Irish people came to the US, they were situated in segregated regions, they were not allowed to go to the same sorts of schools and various sort of things, which means that you have reasons to believe that they're acting against you. But the second reason as to why this kind of threat can exist is because I think that there's a threat of deportation, in the sense that you believe that if you don't continue to act in economically productive ways and you become a liability and you start to depend on the state welfare, the state will opt out of giving you this welfare and will say go back to where you came from, and this is something the US actually did. But thirdly, we think that there was no rehab or alternative options that were given to this person. Just think about it. They came to her and they said, oh, we're going to put you in quarantine. Then they put her out of quarantine and said, okay, you can do what you want, but you can't cook. But what can you do if you can't cook? Are we going to give you some additional education? Are we going to give you some sort of special means and stuff? Yes, opening government tells you many things that a state can do to rehabilitate people. But the fact of the matter is, in real life, Typhoid Mary never had any access to any of these things. She was not given any offer by the state itself for any of these alternative rehabilitation capabilities. And even if you don't believe this spec, this is also true on structural reasons, because they believe that the Irish community and the Italian community and the black community were all communities that were inferior to ethnic American communities that were descendants of the colonial people, which means that they had incentives to preserve all of this welfare for the people that they believe are their own own people and not for the immigrants. What does all of this mean? This means that you have a perception of threat. What does this threat look like? It's not just like, oh, you will have to make less money. The threat is that you make no money. The threat is you can't feed yourself, you can't feed your family, and you can't continue the existence of yourself inside this country. The threat is that your community either disavows you or something like that, or you can't contribute to the community, which means you have the threat of losing out on the support structure, and the only support structure that exists, which is the Irish community in this situation. The next thing I want to talk about is why she did not have alternative options, but before that, I will get opening.
When you've got safe haven in a country and the fact that you can cook for wealthy individuals and invade their personal space, what is this perceived threat that others can't see, only the...
Every time you cook for these wealthy individuals, they also treat you like second-class citizens. They constantly do microaggressions against you. You have no reason to believe that these wealthy individuals are altruistic benefactors. They are people who are paying you for a particular service, and your obligation to yourself and your community is much higher than it is to these wealthy individuals. Your obligation to care for wealthy individuals is much lower than it is to care for your children and to care for yourself. Why did you have no options? The first reason for this is that education is obviously something that did not exist for this community, for Irish people at large, because of segregated schools, but also for women, they did not have access to be able to get educated and go into alternative fields. White women already had low access, Irish women had even lower. But secondly, I think what Duff can maybe say is, oh, you could have done literally any other unskilled job. Instead of cooking, you could have become a maid or any of those things. Maybe this is fair, but here's what it is. In this Irish community and in any immigrant community, there are certain people that will have some sort of sellable skills, and there will be people who are more vulnerable than them that don't have these sellable skills. If I have the sellable skill of being a cook, and I go ahead and don't be a cook, and I just do maid services and stuff, I'm taking away job opportunities from other more vulnerable people of my community who don't even have the option to be able to be a cook. So I'm competing with other members of my community, whereas I can be in a separate tier where I don't have to compete. This has a high chance of A, direct community backlash, where people say that you should not be doing this, but also intrinsic backlash and also intrinsic cognitive dissonance as to the fact that you're harming the community who are the only people who are here for you against this kind of oppressive state who is not trying to take care of you. The TLDR of all of this is as follows. We think that this Mary character had to walk on a tightrope between a variety of different actors that she could not completely trust. She could not completely trust this American state. She could not completely trust the doctors or whatever for reasons that only government already gives you. She could not even trust the customers that she was actually caring about. And most importantly, she was in cognitive dissonance about her community, where she was dependent on the community was dependent on her, and she could not take things away from the community, which would leave her completely on the road with nothing else. Because of this, we think she had no other option. We are very proud to oppose this claim of murder.
Here, here. Hello. Starting speech. In 3, 2. I'm going to take a hard binary. If Mary were not to cook ever again, were not to be employed ever again, were to die based on starvation and not be able to exercise any bodily right whatsoever, and still goes ahead to kill 50 people, we think she should still be convicted of murder. Because the point of opening government is to say that no matter what intent you have, no matter what you have studied, no matter what you know, as long as you're exercising deliberate conscious choice to make people's lives worse, and more deliberately to make people's lives suffer in a way that they die, you should be convicted of murder, because you've taken people's lives away from themselves, you make their lives worse off. This is a principled case, we will win on the principle. What are 4 burdens you need to go ahead and prove for the threshold of murder to be met? This will also take into account the bullshit that comes out from opening opposition that we want to go ahead and make sure that it's not culpable homicide, but it's actually murder, so he's able to meet the threshold of being so grave. The 4 things are this: the knowledge of lethal risk to others. Second, the clear duty to avoid a lethal risk. Third, the deliberate bypassing of safeguards to go ahead and not be able to, for others to be able to exercise the safeguards for the same. And fourth, the level of disregard that leads to meeting the threshold. The first is just on the principle of knowing the weaponization of the risk. When the state gives you credible notice, which is in the Infoslide, that as a consequence to your ordinary or maybe somewhat moral job, because you're cooking for others, you're doing a good thing to your community, as a direct consequence to that, there will be a lethal harm to a select group of people, even if, let's say, it's not a group of people that I can identify out of the crowd right now. It is direct information that as a consequence to actions that you have been prohibited to do, you will commit a crime, that is murder. Therefore, there's efficient and there's credible notice for you to realize and for you to make a decision right now that if I commit this act, I am killing the lives of X number of people, because I already know pre-quarantine that before I was allowed this option in the first place, people died as a consequence to me having this asymptomatic typhoid. This means that people have already died given the situation, people will continue to die. Right now is the point to make the decision. The point at which Mary does not only just go ahead and make this decision to go ahead and do cooking, but according to Infoslide, look at Infoslide, look it up on your phone. She goes ahead and hides her identity in a way to make sure nobody else knows who she is. This deliberate conscious choice to make sure that nobody understands who she is and therefore is not able to identify the fact that she was an asymptomatic typhoid because it's nowhere in the records is direct credible evidence that she knew the fact that there's a lethal risk but she could not take it. What is the emphasis? Why is this important? Because punishments like murder are not just important because it causes death. It causes active dissuasion and gives other people's lower to you. It treats people lower to you that, oh, because I have the ability and because I have the right to go ahead and cook in the kitchen, is this because of which people have the necessary consequence of dying. It's always thinking I am superior to others. That is not just a social contract in terms of two ways. It's a social contract of everybody in society. It's me realizing that just because I have the ability to go ahead and do this and the ability to flout laws and make sure that I don't abide by notices, I will make sure everybody's life is worse off. Everybody's lives are no longer meaningful, and that is a decision that she makes. The first thing I want to talk about is how the liability is equal to the culpability of murder. The claim is simple. After an official identification and there being explicit restriction, she continued to go ahead and do these extreme reckless acts. I want to go ahead and give you some analogies so this is very visualized clearly. Think about the POI that Angad asked, right? What if you're driving and you're driving above the speed limit? Should you be put in jail? The question is that, okay, you might be given a fine, you might not be put in jail. And that's probably going to be the case that, oh, this is not at the level of culpability that meets the threshold of murder. But think about it in a different light. If you are going over the speed limit, but you're also drunk driving, the consequence of that is that it's a possible risk to others. I'm not saying just as a consequence to you drink driving and the consequence to you going over the speed limit, you should be put in jail or should be convicted of murder. But at a point in time, it converts to the harm of other people while you knowingly did that in the first place. You knowingly had drinks, you knowingly went over the speed limit, and you knowingly made decisions that put others' lives in danger. Is the extent of harm that you're causing, and the extent of harm is very, very massive before that POI closing.
Yeah, typhoid is not surely fatal. You can recover from typhoid. So she did not have the intention to kill. You truly believe that she wanted to kill everyone?
Okay, I have simple response. Go to the Infoslide here, read the year it happened. It is 1900s. I'm pretty sure that the kind of modern medicine that we have right now to cure the typhoid that somebody has right now is not the same as a couple of years ago. But secondly, even if that's true, you have been actively told that don't do it, and you actively go ahead and make it a secret. Obviously, there's some level of culpability that increases as a consequence of secrecy. I want to go ahead and talk about the reasoning as to why this goes ahead. Opening opposition can deal with it in their own case. The first thing is knowledge. Obviously, if you talk about knowledge, let's go to forcibility. Forcibility is this. Typhoid in that status quo is deadly. But secondly, you can possibly now not detect the contamination of typhoid. But because go back to clarification that came after the motion was released. It happens through food, it happens through fecal, it happens through oral measures. You do not know when and at which point was it transmitted. Because you're now not just actively making your identity a secret, you're actively making sure that because of the means of dissemination and the means of the ways in which you go ahead and spread typhoid to others is not detectable at all. You're trying to go ahead and the same professional make sure that you're not able to get a single whiff or being able to understand who did this in the first place. The only reason we're able to detect it right now is because we know she was given information in advance, and that is worse off. But lastly, there is a voluntary choice, and this is where opening opposition's case comes in. I want to quickly give a one-liner response, and I want you to listen to this one-liner response because this is half of opening opposition's case dead in the water. They said, you want to give back to your community. You want to give back to your community by cooking food for them that will make them die? Is that how you want to give back to your community? I am not sure that is how you give back to your community. But secondly, even if you want to go ahead and give back to your community in ways that it goes ahead and furthers that, oh, we cooked and we came from Ireland and we made supposed to do great things. Bro, it does does not matter. As long as the amount of harm that you're committing, even to Irish people in the US, because they're immigrants to the US, they're more susceptible to go in and get typhoid because they have lower immunity compared to the people outside. But secondly, this is incredibly harmful to the people of the US, the citizens of the US. You should be put behind bars no matter which country or which continent or which suffered area of the world you come from, because you have committed the legal oppression on others and you made their lives worse off. But secondly, why is this voluntary? I don't care if the government did not give you another job. The government gave you quarantine, gave you food, water, and livelihood for the 6, 7, 8 years of life of the other area you were not allowed to have there. Did you build skills? Did you make sure that you were able to become profitable to the economy? Did you make sure that you were not reliant on other people? No, you did not. You just waited to go back to the economy, like flood typhoid, and make sure that anything bad happens. What's wrong with you is the analysis that you go ahead and make sure you justify this as a thing to your community. You cannot make sure this is good for your community because it's good for the people. It's worse for the people around you at all points of time. This is murder. She should be put behind bars, and this is all that opening government stands for.
Yeah.
Hello everyone, my name is Robin going yellow. So I just want to give a shout out to Hindu Lepsock. I love this Lepsock. I quote this, I won the Crimson TV also, so I just love Hindu beauty. And second shout out to Kishan, love beauty. I give a PY for you guys post 5th. I am 110% to take one, so please ask for 5th. Judges ready? Yes. I will be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. During COVID, despite repeated warnings by the state, there were many migrants who violated lockdowns. Maybe they harmed others, but state told them shut up and stay inside their house without giving them alternative ways of livelihood. Can the Indian state convict them for murder for the crimes of wanting to feed their families? The answer is no, and that is why opening opposition wins. Exception 1, state failure. Why was this state failure and state is responsible for this and not Mary? This is true because of 4 structural reasons. A, it is a state's duty to prevent epidemics, so only state has the capacity to do this because you need a lot of resources to undertake this, and you can't actually impose this on an individual duty primarily because only state can actually solve epidemics, but individuals actually cannot. Secondly, state cannot enforce obligations onto individual people and cannot enforce to take their independence and individual autonomy away for an indefinite period if state does not have a cure for it. The only way for the state to enforce obligations can only be temporal, which has already happened because you were there under lockdown and the state did not actually have a cure. Intuition pump. COVID pandemic was a temporal pandemic, but assuming we never got a cure for COVID, state cannot give you an indefinite punishment and always stay in your house for eternity because we can't solve the cure. Which basically means that the autonomy matters and therefore you basically cannot do that. Thirdly, individual autonomy matters. Autonomy matters because Mary never consented or chose to actually get this problem. So she's actually innocent. So she's being punished for the thing which she never actually chose. The intuition pump is that if someone is born with a mental disorder, they're not sent to jail even if they commit murder because they never chose that mental disorder. The mental disorder naturally occurred. Similarly, you never chose typhoid. That is why you are being punished for something which you did not even choose in the very first place. Therefore, individual autonomy has to be given precedence. Fourth of all, often it is state failure to not make this a priority because state often does not give funding for this because other things are generally perceived as more important. Or pharma companies deprioritizing solutions because they benefit more from mitigating factors rather than actually solving this. The conclusion of all of this is that it is the state is guilty and Mary is not guilty, and Mary's individual autonomy should not be taken away, which basically means that Mary is correct in doing whatever actions, and those actions are quite reasonable. Like this already beats us and makes us win this round. Extension 2. By the way, this is going to be the most extension in this round. I'm sure she was a smarting, they will come up with something, but this is debate training. So notice, reasonably, Mary did some harm. We all agree. But the point is, it is not proportionate to a murder. So reasonably, maybe giving some punishment like a mass slaughter would be the fairest thing. But thank you so much, Cap, that there is a hard binary. Which means, either she's 100% murder or she's innocent. Thank you so much for the hard binary, by the way. This means the most important metric in this debate becomes, does some punishment more closer to innocence, or is it more closer to murder? Because we agree some harm has happened. I'm going to extend why is it more closer to innocence by lots of beautiful mechanisms. Number one, Blackstone principle. Oftentimes state believe that it is better for 10 guilty people to walk free than when innocent being in jail. This is because when an innocent is in jail, the harm on that person is super intense. You are taking away the rights of someone at such a high scale. Sending to a prison, you will be discriminated. You will not be your family. This is so intense and guilty people walking free, primarily because we think it is the biggest violation a state can do to actually harm someone of sending them to jail when this person is not worthy of that. Mechanism 2, this is closer to innocence because jail generally exists so we can rehabilitate people, so we can change moral structures of people. If I'm evil, I believe that I need to do some murders and stuff, state needs to teach me this is bad. But Mary does not need any teaching. Mary has done nothing immoral. She never wanted to kill. All Mary actually wanted to do was to provide a livelihood for their own family, which basically means that there's nothing which they can achieve also from the rehabilitative process because there's nothing to change with Mary. Mechanism 3, punishment needs to be proportional. Proportionality is a very important mechanism under the CJ system. If I stab you, you can nuke me. You can also stab me. Proportionality matters. This is super non-proportional because number one, Mary had no intention, which basically means that Mary actually never intended to do any harm in the very first place. But secondly, there was no direct harm also because Mary never actually put a gun on somebody else. This was such an indirect nature of harm caused by Mary. Therefore, the proportional punishment of murder is something which is completely unjustified and can never exist. Right? The last mechanism that I actually want to talk about is a direct correlation. This is very important, by the way. So there is an issue of how much of your actions alone are responsible for the harm of an epidemic take place. I'm going to give you lots of reasons why there was not a direct correlation, and that is why we will completely win. Mechanism 1, oftentimes non-cooking things can also cause this because the context has said that cooking is the one in which things most happen, but doesn't mean that other things can also not be there. We basically mean that some of bacteria can move from various other things also, which means just the act of cooking alone is not enough for you to do that. Presumably, it could have presumably done because of non-cooking ways also. Second, there are lots of factors which actually lead to an epidemic because when you gave this typhoid to someone else, that someone else gave it to somebody else. Now, somebody else is not guilty because you gave it to them, but you also received it from somewhere, right? So you are also not necessarily the source of it. So if the other person is also not guilty for spreading it further, you are also probably not guilty because maybe you got it from somewhere which you don't know of. The point is that it is unclear whether you are the source of everything. Because that is the case, we think it is unfair to actually do this, and there is a lack of direct correlation. Mechanism 3, there are lots of other external factors which are also responsible for an epidemic. Things like people's immunity, things like how fast things are actually spreading. The point I'm trying to make is that this is not a direct correlation. This is a murder charge is completely unjustified. Lastly, Rishani explains that it is quite reasonable for me to act this way. Is it super unreasonable? It is not. One, Rishani explains the Irish communities are very vulnerable. They're really doing it self-defense. But two, it is tough to move for other jobs and you probably have no choice. It is tough for you to save the earn money in other jobs also. But thirdly, you don't trust the doctor or the state, right? The conclusion of this is that you had an opportunity to respond. Closing.
What happens when more asymptomatic carriers come forward in the future and Mary is not protected?
Okay, I will talk about the precedent argument. Okay, the conclusion that this is much closer to innocence than to murder charge. And lastly, also identity. Most people hide their identity for self-defense. Like Bangladeshis do it in India because they primarily know that the harms could actually be massive, which means that even if you change your identity, it is completely fine, and you completely find that it is considered the Krishna principle. Extension. Why does this actually set a very wrong precedent to give the murder charge? Number one, if you set this precedent, we think this is a precedent of targeting vulnerable people more. So people actually have no options will be harmed more in the future. Secondly, you will reduce state capability to actually invest in medical technology because state can always get away by saying that these people are actually guilty. But thirdly, oftentimes the precedent is actually setting that it is not state's duty, but it is the individual's duty to actually solve for things. So if you actually are responsible for something which you don't choose also, like a mental disorder, you probably could be harmed. This sets a very wrong precedent in the legal system. Why is precedent important? Because we are in historic times. Constitutions are not developed as the way as Sanjay argument. So basically the point is that lots of the people can actually take these precedents and can other constitutions also this. This is bad for precedent because this also leads to more harm. But also in the other arguments are more important than precedent, by the way. We clearly fail because you have no obligation to follow the agreement, right? You were forcibly quarantined. You never consented to. But state did not give you nothing. State did not give you any solution also. In the end, opening up is clear evidence because we explain this is much more closer to innocence. Yes, she was wrong, but not wrong enough to be a murder charge. And you have to be innocent, and that is precisely why we are taking the Willis trophy and not the other trophy. Thank you so much for opening up. Decision wins.
to explain why this conviction would lead to lesser reporting of typhoid, therefore killing more people, and would increase anti-immigration rhetoric, again killing a lot more people, and we'll obviously do the way more opening opportunities. The first thing I want to do is just frame New York in 1900s, and I think Eno does a good job on it. I would just add is that often migrants work in low-wage jobs in New York, which is already a very big hotspot for migrants because of all the family things they talk about. That means overwhelmingly the jobs which migrants worked in were things like cooking, cleaning, and things like barbers, which were in contact with you, physical contact with you, because they were low-skilled jobs, which obviously they were the ones who filled them because they got this job for less money also. That means they're already trying to intermix with white people, and that means there are a lot of poor migrants who work in the community very closely with rich white people and already feel threatened. What does this conviction at government does? One, when you convict as a state, you create a symbol out of Mary, which also the Infoslide says, that you literally called her Typhoid Mary. That means cartoonists often made caricatures of her being behind jails with Irish colors on her body, and that is factually true. But even if you do not agree with this, the reason is often rich, wealthy people lobby for this kind of justice because they had a lot of money to do this with the state, and they want to explain why minorities are the ones who harm them because they are the ones who get killed because of this. They often push these cartoonists, push these states to do this in the worst ways they can to sensationalize this once the conviction happens. Second is that criminal law is now something that engages with public health at government. At opposition, maybe still states are still discriminatory and give them things like low education, gives them things like low job, and obviously that's true. But when you criminalize health at government is when it creates very unique, unprecedented fear. This is true for two reasons. One is that minorities feel they cannot control their body or things like whether they will become symptomatic typhoid or not, because this is not in their control. Things like altercations with police or being in one place or not are something that you can still control and protect yourself from going into jail. But these are the things that you're scared about the most because you don't even know if you're a carrier and you don't even know if you can get this out of your system. Second is they often become the first scapegoat because the narrative of calling minorities and migrants dirty is very simple because they live in slums and because they are probably poor workers, and often conviction of murder is the biggest sentence that you can give some person, that they're behind jail for 500 or 50 years, versus discrimination is still fine, that probably you get some fines or a jail time for 1 or 2 years, which you still think you can escape from. This is what creates unprecedented fear because of the extent of punishment and because of the certainty that you can never escape it. Third is that Infoslide says that Mary resisted. Often resistance means that Mary herself felt fear in her own communities, that they're putting me behind bars for nonsense reasons, that I am not responsible for it. And often these communities lived in tight-knit regions because they're already threatened of their identity. That means this information spread way faster and in the most sensationalized manners because this directly comes from people like Mary, directly comes from cartoonists and stuff. This means the incident gets heavily sensationalized and puts minority communities in unprecedented fear because this is directly state-backed violence. This does two things. One, this happens even if Mary had intent to kill and probably trusted the state or not. This is the best case that we take at Gov. This fear happens regardless. Second, this is the most certain because it is based on societal factors which we factually know of what is happening in New York, in comparison to internal battles of Mary, which are always going to be speculative because you don't know this person for certain. What are the two harms of it? First, this vastly reduces reporting in poor communities because you feel you can be put behind jail and not just suffering from typhoid but also now suffering in jails. This is bad for two things. One is that often patient zero arises from these places specifically because typhoid-like diseases come from bad water and food which are present in poor areas and slums. So if you don't control that patient zero, even if rich people do report at government way later, if the disease has already spread from those communities outside, it's very difficult for states to control it even if reporting happens way later. That's why you need reporting as early as possible from these poor communities to quarantine the disease. Second, they feel they're likely to lose the case also because they have no money, they have no lawyers, and they feel their lives will be certainly destroyed if they report. I agree that there might be still incentives to report because obviously you want your typhoid to be treated. But the mentality of these minorities is that you can still wait out typhoid. Not everyone dies because of typhoid. You see people around you still living like Mary didn't die of typhoid and stuff like this. So you feel it's still uncertain if you get killed. But if you report, it is certain that you will be behind bars because you can never win that case and you will get your life destroyed. The weighing is that first, this directly means a lot more people die and a lot more people suffer because of the disease. The principle of CGS works on minimizing harms, and if most people are already dying, that very principle is harm. But second, most people would anyway choose their lives over following the constitution. Like we free terrorists all the times when our aeroplanes get hijacked, even if those terrorists should be behind bars, because state values the lives of those people a lot more. This is already a precedent that states follow. CGS often gets power from the state and people, and if those very people do not want to agree agree with putting Mary behind bars because it can kill them. We should care about those people more. And I think Abhivik did quite a good wing for us to win over opening opposition anyways, so we are winning because of that wing also. Second, this creates insane anti-immigration rhetoric, and this is bad. I'll explain before that opening.
Mary was asymptomatic, so she obviously won't die. But the fact that she has chosen to actively threaten white majoritarian people and go against the state, what fear is she under?
Yeah, my case is that other people get fearful, not Mary. Because Mary is going against white people, that already proves why white people have more incentives to sensationalize this case a lot more, creating more fear among those minority communities to feel that they would be jailed behind. And if Mary resisted and then also ended up behind jail, obviously you feel you are no other one who is special enough, and you would also end up being behind jail. That means on government, when this insane anti-immigration rhetoric spends, people are scared to employ a cook, employ these cleaners, which are the only jobs that these people can enter into because these are jobs which are in contact with them. They're scared to even shake hands with people who look like Mary, who come from these poorer communities, even if they are not discriminatory, because they care about their life a lot more. This means, one, most minorities find themselves completely unemployed at government because there is no other alternative jobs that they can opt into. That means when they have lesser money, and again means that they have lesser access to doctors, this means again more diseases spread when money is being taken away from them. In our worst case, at least minorities are employed and can, some of them report to doctors, some of them can get medicines, and some of them can get healed. So the extent of that epidemic is still way lesser on our circles when minorities are employed and have money. Second, minorities get angrier now at government because there is no resort for them through voting because they are migrants, they are not citizens regardless, and there is no way for them to backlash against the state. So often the only resort they have is to engage in things like violence against those white people because the microaggression against them is increasing day by day. This violence and riot often end up again being more people killed, and already police and judiciary is often weak in 1900s New York, so it is very difficult to control these riots and violence also, meaning not just minorities get harmed, but these rich wealthy people also get killed and suffer from these diseases. The comparative is, one, you get better reporting because you will not be jailed, and you obviously have incentives to report because you don't want yourself to die from typhoid. The calculus shift, and therefore when better reporting happens, states can stop the epidemic from spreading. Second, some discrimination sure happens at opposition, but you at least are not unemployed. You can use that money to treat yourself. That means way lesser people die on our side of the house, which is the biggest impact in this debate.
Is that people would be scared to employ migrant workers, etc. in the event less reporting happens, and the second is that less reporting happens in and of itself. Let's deal with the first claim first, which is why people won't be scared to then employ them in the first place. The first is that there is this work is seen as lower class, which means that rich people are anyway not going to opt into this, which means the demand always exists, which means the prerequisite in this case is going to be like go get tested for typhoid, and if you're okay, we'll actually employ you, which means it's not that this workload is going to go less, but in fact this is going to spread awareness for typhoid, because now the general consensus is that you need to get tested if you want to work over here. But also notice on the flip, if people are not convicted and they are moving out freely, these employers will think because Mary was asymptomatic, maybe all people in this migrant population are asymptomatic, which means they'll be even more averse to employing them in the first place, which means only on our side of the house, when there's actual fear around the fact that you need to get tested, people will get tested. This flips the claim on employment, because the end impact on this is that on their side of the house, people are dying of starvation because nobody is ready to employ them. This just matters more because these people are vulnerable, they have been failed by the state, all of that potato thing that Krishan was talking about, which means at that point in time, because they're already vulnerable, this is just a bad thing to happen. The second thing is on less reporting. I have 5 reasons for why this is not the case. The first is that people are likely to rat each one out, because when my sister or wife is getting infected by it, because my neighbor got infected by it, there's a direct incentive to hold them culpable, because I don't want my kids to get typhoid in the first place, which means this ratting out is going to happen. Second, in areas where she already worked, there was common knowledge about the fact that in houses where she was cooking, this was particularly happening, which means this was stuff that maybe maids were talking about in the area, or gossip and how all of that works, which means this reporting, at least implicitly, was anyway happening, and households were aware of each other that, oh, this is something that is happening. But third, this is against the incentive of state, because state wants to control this, because if more people have typhoid, it means less people are going to work, and this is affecting wealthy people also, which means this like the population in general is not as economically productive, which means the state would want to interfere over here. But fourthly, just think about it. Mary also said that I don't want to get tested, and the state pulled her out of her home, which means it is the responsibility of the state to go inside each house and test everyone. Think about what happened during COVID. There were mandates that were rolled out saying that you need to put a cotton swab up your nose and get tested if you want to cross the borders of Delhi. The same is going to happen over here. We don't see why the reverse is what they want to do. So closing opposition is clearly reading on that. But lastly, because of fear, because Mary got convicted, she got convicted for murder precisely because she did not want to get tested. Because if the state wants to induce fear, it will do so this way. They'll say that because she did not get convicted and she was an asymptomatic carrier, that is why we are convicting her for murder. This gives more room for people to be like, you know what, I don't want to go to jail, which is probably why I should go out and get tested. This likely is going to increase the amount of reporting that closing opposition wants to push over here, which means closing opposition is already out of the debate. Let's deal with top half. What does top half tell you? So here's the clash. OG says societal awareness is the reason why intention existed for Mary, which is that empirically there were people dying and she was cooking and stuff like that, and there was intervention by the state, and this is a bad thing. Like opening opposition tells you there was a perception of threat by state, etc., and that is why this is going to happen. I want to just sidestep this and say the reason why there is intention is because even if you're an asymptomatic carrier, there are things that you need to do for this typhoid, for this transmission to work, and this is the science behind it. You need to work with contaminated water. You need to prepare. The hygiene standards are not as much. You're probably working with like old food, and you're constantly working with that. Over here, the intention is there, but even if that is not the case, notice this. The same people that are working in a house, because it's not just one cook, there are also maids, etc. from the same community. They are also eating the leftover food that you yourself are preparing and the water that you've contaminated, which means by virtue of this, the trickle down is so that you are not only killing wealthy people but also people within your own community. This directly clashes with opening opposition's neck on perception of threat and why there is an obligation within the community, etc. We believe this mechanism is just more proximate to the actor insofar as first you are just spreading it within the community, but also you are ending up killing the people in wealthy neighborhoods who otherwise would have provided employment to these lower people within your own community, which is a double harm on all your community, because now they don't have jobs, because guess what, all rich people are dead. So that's that. Yes.
A murderer is not a murderer just because calling them a murderer can have good or bad consequences. A murderer is a murderer because they've committed or not committed murder. We can't let rapists, godmen go free just because their followers will burn trains if they go to jail. This is a debate about guilt. Like top or bottom half tries to argue about consequences, but the world is not going to change because of this case. Her life will change irreversibly.
Okay, that's all great. Let's move on to my case. So here's the thing. We want to push a simple thing, which is that the precedence is the most important thing in this debate. As Abhiti already raised, the entire bit about intentionality and morality is just speculated on top, which means what we are able to do very simply is just on scale cause less amount of deaths in the future and create awareness as asymptomatic thing is actually something that you need to get no more POIs. You need to get tested for, and this is something that causes more and more deaths in the future, and we would want to prevent that in the first place. Coming on to Prashant's POI now about like murder and all. Here's the thing. Why do we call a serial killer a serial killer?
Essential POI.
And a maniac? I took one, please. Okay? And a maniac. Because here's the thing. They'll kill without any regard of anything, but they might have some perception of, oh, this is actually a good thing I'm doing, it's the right thing I'm doing. Think about Charles Manson, think about people who think schizophrenia is okay, etc. The thing is, in their head, it's the right thing because they never had the epistemic access to it, because maybe God came inside their head and told them that this is the pathway of your life, etc. They are doing the right thing because epistemically it's not, they did not have access to it. But Does that mean that the state cannot remove them from society if it is going to cause harm for future people or has already caused harm for people? Now I want to compare this analogy to our case, which is that Mary had n number of times when she was told by people, she saw death around her, she probably saw the food that she cooked killing so many people around her in her community. If despite all of those warnings, she continues to do this, because notice, the alternative does exist. She could have been a maid, she could have laid bricks, she could have literally just swarm, I don't know, she could have done anything, but she did not. If she's changed her name once, what's to say she wouldn't change it again? This fella is the work of a maniac, and that is why we believe she needs to be purged from society, because she'll continue doing this again and again. Or very simply, we think precedence is the only thing that matters in this debate. We are able to prevent a lot of life, and as for reporting, we think that happens more on our side of the house. You actually get more awareness.
The way to adjudicate this debate is just to determine what's the most certain outcome that you can get out of this particular conviction. Top half debates this motion on the backward-looking idea, which is what CD5 points out, that what are the metrics of murder? Is it intention? Is it consequence? And those things will decide whether you should undertake this particular action of conviction or not. The problem with this is that the context slide, and they use specific example in the context slide, makes us a deadlock at top half. Because it's impossible to know whether Mary was actually doing it for her own survival, or whether she actually has disdain for the other people's lives and she actually ended up doing it because she just did not care about other people. Which means intention is impossible to prove in this debate. Yes, she wanted to survive, but she also did not care about other individuals, and that means both top half teams are right in their own isolated bubble, but this clash is not resolved. What we are going to do at closing opposition, the way we win this debate is quite simple. We are saying that it doesn't matter what Mary's intention was, charging her with murder and convicting her is going to create fallout which is far beyond harmful and more important for the state to measure in and factor in to not give this punishment. I want to give a thesis of this argumentation, and it's quite simple, right? Every person with HIV and AIDS in today's society is someone who is not seen as a criminal, even if they have spread the disease inadvertently. Why? Because you understand that if you go and charge them with crime, they will not report themselves, they will not test themselves, they will not have the incentive to do this because they might just be put behind bars when they're seen as someone who has disease. Corporates are not charged with things like accidental murders, even when they have the murder happens on their grounds. Because states know that if they charge corporates with murder, they'll pull investment out. Doctors are not charged with murder when they do things like medical negligence. Because in the case when you actually allow doctors to be charged with murder, then doctors will stop operating on people that they don't deem are going to survive, right? All this has precedent in law. What this means is that people don't charge people for murder even in an instance when the fallout is quite massive and you have to care about the implications of charging this person with murder. That is the only certain harm in this debate. What's our case at closing opposition after we just broke down this metric? One, if you charge Mary with murder, people are going to just feel that at any point of time, if they are the ones who hold the disease, then they are criminals. And that means they will not self-report. And it's going to target closing government here. Closing government says that you will still have deterrence to report. But when I know that if I go to a health official and tell them that I have a disease, check me, and they probably put me behind bars because they feel that I have spread the disease to my family, then at that point I will not report because it's a self-conservation instinct, right? A self-preservation instinct that forces me to not report. So when you are shown the stick of fear, people resort to hiding things and not coming out with those things, right? Hiding is the easiest way to hide yourself from the penalty of you being put behind bars. Lesser reporting is just so much more damaging for this period of time in 1900s than anything that government or both top-up teams can claim. Why is that the case? Because if people don't report in a time of outbreak of typhoid, then at that point, the typhoid just keeps on creeping within society and there's no ability for us to stop it. Only when people feel that they will not be criminalized as a consequence of them having a disease will they ever come out to report, and reporting is the only or the first step to actually solve the disease or identify who we need to quarantine and isolate and how we solve the problem. Which means on scale there are far more deaths on side government because people just choose to opt out of reporting in and of itself because they fear the kind of backlash from the state. Secondly, I would note that the implication of putting Mary behind bars also means that every Irish person is seen in the eye of disdain. That this person is here to kill us. There's an anti-immigrant rhetoric that increases so much. The problem with anti-immigrant rhetoric is it just does not creep into political systems. It also creeps into your microaggression that you have with individuals. Yes, you will still hire them as CGs, right? But the problem is you treat them with disdain. You will not give them the right wages. You will not show them, oh, you should go to a doctor. Those kind of microaggressions means that these people opt out of state much more, and that in the interim creates more public backlash and things like violence in the short run. Because if the immigrants don't feel that they represent the system and they are the ones being put behind bars for carrying a disease that they never consented into, then at that point they don't end up, at that point they opt out of state in of itself. The weighing of this argument is quite simple. Future victims matter much more because they are one more in scale than the kind of victims that Mary has already created. Because these people are like either dead or these people have recovered, right? The problem is if reporting numbers go down in society, then everyone who's now born is going to face a harm of typhoid, and that is something that we want to protect on our side because future victims are just infinite in number. It's impossible to predict how many will come about. But secondly, they're also more vulnerable because these will be children and babies who face typhoid as a consequence. Right? Obviously, if you're born, you are a baby, you don't go away as an adult. Secondly, uncertainty of claims. Yes, there may be self-defense as opening option says, or there may be mens rea as opening government says. But the only certain impact is that the fallout of this case will be sensationalized by the media, considering that this is a big case where you're charging someone for murder of a crime that has never happened before. At that point of time, the media sensationalism will mean that more and more people opt into this rhetoric, opt into the fact that these people are criminals, and more people just feel that they're not in the representative system. That means there's more opt-out and lesser reporting. This is a certain implication of us following through. Even if opening government is completely right, there was full intention, we just feel that this is not the time to put her behind bars because the typhoid is going to rise as a consequence of people just not self-reporting.
15 seconds. Anti-immigration rhetoric, perception of fear, and few people dying. All of these are possibilities. People have already died. That is a factual fact. If people dying and babies dying are important things, that has already happened. Who do you ask?
I cut you off. You can't protect 15 seconds. 10 seconds. So problem is this. If people died, Mary did it because of self-defense, as Bo says. But she did not want to kill other individuals. She was not a mass murderer. What she was trying to do is get food for family. That's the opening of this right. Which means that this is a deadlock right at top half. It's impossible to ascertain whether the intent was there or not. The only thing that's certain is that there is fallout afterwards because this is a minority that you're putting behind bars for things that they were not in control. I would also note that public health services have never been ever involved things like criminal law. But at a point in time you allow someone to have a murder charge against them, then every minority or every person who is convicted of or who does have a disease will just not want to self-diagnose or even come out with the disease because they'll always fear that if I spread to someone else, I'll be convicted of murder. That precedent is so much more harmful for things like reporting in the future. I would note that even every other patient who is an HIV patient will be seen as someone who's already a criminal or a murderer because they might have spread to someone else. That is a rhetoric we want to avoid. That rhetoric creates more epidemics, larger epidemics, harms future victims as opposed to an uncertain claim on intention that never gets resolved, and that's why it's been this debate.